welcome to another Tweedy Pubs video, and for me a bit of a special one. This is the Luppitt Inn in the village of Luppitt in beautiful East Devon, a pub I've been wanting to come to for years. Let me take a moment to tell you why I think this pub is so special. It is a very rare example of a farmhouse pub, a style of pub that was once much more common, and it takes us back to the origins of public houses that open themselves up to the public, in this case a farmhouse. The farmer here would have opened perhaps originally just one room of the farmhouse to provide beer to the local community and make a bit of extra income. Until 2020, the Luppitt Inn was ran by Mary Wright, who was still at the helm until she passed away at the age of 98. It was often cited as England's smallest pub at that time. I think it could still make a reasonable claim to that now. And the main barroom just had a single table in it. It was occasionally said that some of the locals just helped themselves to beer. After Mary died, the pub closed for a few years and there had to be some essential building repairs. There have been some changes to the internal layout, but a lot of the internal fabric, a lot of the fixtures and fittings have been preserved, just perhaps moved around a little bit. There is a bit more internal space now to turn it into more of a viable business. Cheers from the Luppitt Inn. Otter bitter, brewed 2 miles away. I know because I've just walked from there. The current pub building likely dates to a rebuild following a fire in 1877. The original building of the pub might have been thatched. Just across the street we have the old post office here, which is still a thatched building. The pub side of the building is in a mixture of stone and brick. There's some brick dressings around some of the windows and a slightly curious wavy line of bricks going up to the chimney there. I wonder if that was a repair at some point. Some of the stone probably is local, including, I think some of this is chert. That's quite a popular building material in this part of the world. But the other side of the pub building looks very much more still like a house. It's rendered. I think that has more of the original residential property over on that side. You could easily miss that it's a pub if you were just passing by and you didn't know it was here. One of the only clues is the old sign there for the Luppitt Inn. Note the Red Lion, that's actually the former name of the pub. The only other clue that it is a pub today is the old licensing sign, still bearing the name of the former licensee, Mary Wright. I think Mary must have been her middle name. The pub was previously on CAMRA's list of historic pub interiors, but following the reopening in 2025, it was revisited by the pub heritage team, and they made the difficult decision, regrettably, to remove it from the list because, as noted earlier, there were some necessary repairs to the building during that period of closure. I think there possibly had been some damp issues, and the owners had made the, I think, probably quite rational decision to expand the interior a bit. So most of the original fixtures are still there, the bar counter is still there, it's only moved a tad just to accommodate the new layout, and the old bar back fitting is still there, that has moved onto a side wall. Even the original table, the round table that's depicted in some of the old pictures of the interior when it was that one room with Mary at the helm, is still there, but the removal of one internal wall and the expansion into what was previously a bit of private space, the private parlour for Mary in her time there, although it's only doubled the internal space of that particular room. According to Phil, one of the couple that are currently running the pub, it's effectively tripled the capacity. With that one table bar room before, you could only really get perhaps 6 people in that main bar room. Now you can get perhaps 20 or so. Of course, not an issue on a day like today when there's it's pleasant weather, we're in the middle of the summer and there's all these outside tables, but in the middle of winter, I can imagine that's very much appreciated. The walls are still decorated with some of the original pictures that were there during Mary's reign, and also some art from local artists. One of the most interesting ones to me that I'd actually seen when I was doing the research for this pub is a painting from the 1920s by Robert Bevan, which actually shows the pub. Not that you'd necessarily notice it was a pub given the angle that it's been depicted from. The title of that painting is just The Pub in Luppitt. They don't refer to it as either the Luppitt Inn or the Red Lion, the old name for the pub. pub. You can see a chimney stack at one side, and it gives a sense that perhaps more of the pub building might have been rendered at that point, rather than just the front, the sort of the more domestic side that we see today. Hopefully I can show you a similar view from the farmyard over there today to compare with that painting by Robert Bevan. So to recap, originally there was one main bar room to the right-hand side of the door as you go in, and that is still where the main bar room is today, but that is now a larger main bar room with, as I said, many of the original fixtures and fittings. And there was originally a second room off to the left, which was apparently rarely used, I suppose a lounge bar, if you like, extra seating over to the left, and I think that has now reverted back to a bit of private space for the owners of the pub. So we have one contiguous larger space that occupies the original main bar plus a bit of an extension towards the back, and overall the internal space of the pub is larger. It can accommodate more people. Perhaps we could talk a bit about the history of the pub. There will be chapter markers in this video. If you just want to look at the interior and you're not interested in the old newspaper clippings, then feel free to skip ahead. As noted already, the pub was originally called the Red Lion. The earliest newspaper mention I found of it as the Red Lion goes all the way back to 1750. Alas, it doesn't really tell us much about the pub at that time. This was just used as a venue for an auction of some land nearby, but it does at least tell us the name of the landlord at that point in history. I think that's something like Samuel Pavey. From the 1850s to the 1870s, many of the newspaper mentions of the pub were actually about local ploughing matches. Ploughing matches still exist today, and it's a competition between local farmers or their ploughmen, where they are judged on who can plough the neatest and straightest furrows. There were various local organisations that organised these ploughing matches in the area, including the Luppitt, Monkton, Ottery and CAMRA Agricultural Association. So the Red Lion was often used as the venue for the dinner after these ploughing matches. One aside here is that at that point in history, and particularly in rural areas, dinner was, yes, the main meal of the day, but it was typically held around midday or early afternoon. So this was a bunch of ploughmen sitting in a pub eating lunch. The pub must have had significantly more seating back then, as that article says that there were 80 seated. And I think possibly there was something like a barn or a skittle alley that's mentioned in later newspapers that was used for those events. And later on in 1865, it's described as a capacious skittle alley adjoining the Red Lion for another one of those ploughing match dinners, and I suspect that was something like a repurposed barn. On that particular occasion, it seated somewhere upwards of 60 guests. Although these events weren't always so well attended, in 1867 we have the Luppitt and Ottery ploughing match, with the dinner afterwards again being held here at the Red Lion, albeit with very few present, owing, it was said, to some division between the Ottery and Luppitt parishes. Presumably there was a rivalry at the time between these two neighbouring villages, and perhaps Ottery was the rugged island to Luppitt's craggy island. Even presumed guest of honour on that occasion, Viscount Sidmouth, made his excuses and did not attend. I think there is some connection between the Viscount Sidmouth and Ottery. Possibly they had their ancestral seat there. The pub in the village over there is called the Sidmouth Arms. Then in 1870, yet another ploughing match dinner was held here at the Red Lion, and there are named attendees, including one Mr. Tweed, no relation as far as I'm aware, and we'll be hearing a bit more from him shortly. An 1861 newspaper mention of the Red Lion Inn in Luppitt tells of William Richards, who was ostler and waiter for the pub at the time, and he was charged with assaulting a policeman who he'd inadvertently hit while trying to turf out some ruffians who were brawling inside the pub. He was represented in court by Mr. Tweed, who I assume must have been something like a local lawyer. The fact that Richards was described as an ostler and a waiter suggests two things to me. First of all, that probably the Luppitt Inn at that point in history provided some kind of overnight accommodation. I can't imagine that you'd need someone to handle the horses if you weren't stabling people's mode of transport overnight while they were staying here. And secondly, the fact that he was also described as a waiter tells us that at this point in history, the pub had table service. Although in the big cities, bar counters had started to become the norm from about this period of history onwards, in rural areas they didn't become regular fittings in pubs until much later, and I think possibly here at the Luppitt Inn it may not have had its first bar counter installed until as late as the 1950s, and that is still the bar counter we see today. Many of the other newspaper mentions from the 1870s onwards refer to various wranglings around the licence. There is an account that the pub burnt down in 1877. As mentioned earlier, that means that the current building probably dates to slightly after that. Shortly after that, the local vicar applied to have the licence for the pub transferred to him, which was apparently considered quite irregular at the time. I think it probably still would be today. It seems in the interim, while they were waiting for the pub to be rebuilt, they continued to serve beer in the barn, possibly that barn that had previously been used for those ploughing match dinners. And it was curiously described by the vicar, Reverend Granger, as a kind of place used by photographers. That shortage of accommodation led to some reservations by the authorities. A few weeks later, good old Mr. Tweed managed to persuade the bench that the licence should be renewed, providing them reassurances that the house would be speedily rebuilt. The earliest mention of it as the Luppitt Inn comes a couple of years later in 1879 in another article on licensing changes in the area. An application was made by Mr. Tweed, there he is again, on behalf of Mr. Sansom for a new licence for the Luppitt Inn Luppitt. It's curious that that was a new licence at that time, having just been renewed 2 years earlier. I don't know if that was perhaps something to do with the building being rebuilt or possibly the name of the pub changing. A few years later, in 1883, it pops up again when it was up for sale, and it appears at that time it was referred to by both names, the Luppitt Inn and the Red Lion. Here we also have the full name of that licensee, Thomas Sansom. It appears on the 1880s OS map, named as the Red Lion Inn. And the pub has been in possession by the Wright family, as it still is today, since the time of that map, sometime in the 1880s. Although in the 1881 census it was still Thomas Sansom running the pub, by 1889 we see Charles Wright named as licensee in a newspaper article when he was granted a special licence to keep the pub open until 2 a.m. for a ball. You can see members of the Wright family in the census records every decade from then on, 1891 up until 1921, which is the most recent census that is publicly available. This Charles Wright, born in 1854, had handed over the reins of the pub to his son William by 1921. And in the census record you can also see a young Albert Wright, aged just 4, who was in fact Mary Wright's future husband. He took over the running of the pub in the 1950s, and today it is Albert and Mary's granddaughter, Caroline, running the pub with her husband, Phil. The continuity there is quite incredible, somewhere in the region of 140 years and 5 generations of the same family running this pub. Should probably say a few words about how to actually get here, because by English standards this is a surprisingly remote pub. The village of Luppitt is about 5 miles out of Honiton, the town where the nearest train station is, but no public transport serves Luppitt itself, so your options are either get a train to Honiton and get a taxi, or better still, just stay in the area for a couple of days so you can appreciate it. I think there are a couple of holiday cottages maybe in the village. It does only open currently 3 days a week, Monday evenings, Wednesday evenings and Friday evenings, and it's worth checking those opening hours on the website, and I think they possibly have a Facebook page before your visit just to be sure in case anything changes. It opens something like 7:30 in the evening on Mondays and Wednesdays and a little bit earlier on a Friday. Here is a look at the bar lineup, and there is one and only one beer there which I'm perfectly happy about because it happens to be something I really like. Otter Bitter, which, as I probably already said earlier, is brewed just something like 2 miles away in the Otter brewery, which is sort of on the outskirts of the village of Luppitt. It's served in a sort of polypin, and I think that was also the case under Mary's reign. I don't think they've actually ever had hand pulls as such, but it's in very good shape, it's very good condition. It tastes slightly different when served in this way. It's slightly sweeter, perhaps slightly more malty. Still really very much enjoying this. There's a selection of other drinks in that kind of bar back fitting behind various cans and bottles, and they actually have a full license, so they serve spirits as well, so hopefully something for everyone there, but I'm very much a fan of Otter bitter, so that is what I have gone for. I'm delighted to report it's actually doing a reasonable trade for not long after opening on a Wednesday midweek. There's got a dozen, perhaps 15 people here already, and a lot of people coming and going, which is really good to see. One of the other things that the pub has long been famous for, and this goes back again to Mary's time at the helm, is a collection of puzzles. Most of them are on that round table which was there during Mary's time. These apparently come from, I think, a collector in the village who donates some of them to the pub. And I did try a couple. Fiendishly difficult.
You're right, yeah. I did an apprenticeship with them. Yeah. I was a Jack. Range Rover. Did you tap out one? I did it one time. White one. Yeah, that was.
It's a bit dark now, isn't it? You probably can't see me, can you? But I've had a really, really nice evening at the Luppitt Inn. Talked to some of the locals, some of the regulars, which meant I didn't do quite so much talking to you lot on camera, but hopefully that's given you a bit of a sense of the pub. I think the remodelling of the interior, it made sense. The pub was busy while I was in there, and it had more people in there than ever could have fit in with the previous layout. And they have kept the original bar counter, they've kept the original bar back, they've kept things like the original clock in there. Lots of the internal things are the same as they always were. It's just more people can enjoy it now. I think it makes sense. Anyway, sorry about this incredibly dark outro. I've had a great time there. Love the beer, love the people, love the building, love the pub, love the setting. So, heartily recommend the Luppitt Inn. Difficult place to get to, but I think it's worth the effort. Thanks very much for watching. See you on the next one. Bye bye.